My name is Katie Core. I'm the president and CEO of the Nashville Public Education Foundation, and we are thrilled to be hosting this conversation along with our wonderful colleagues at Vanderbilt University. We have been trying at the foundation to have more conversations about the type of experiences our students in Nashville are having, not just in our schools, which is obviously incredibly important, but also just in general. How is Nashville serving its youth and its children? And we did a poll a couple of weeks ago that showed that 4 out of 5 Nashvillians do not think we as a city prioritize our children and youth. And so we really wanted to kind of get into that. What does that mean for our students? What does that mean for our families? And this is part of a conversation, a series of conversations that we are holding to build on a documentary that we produced this summer called By Design. It explored the inequities that are baked into our systems in the city of Nashville that are inhibiting some students and some groups of students from succeeding in our public schools. So this is part of that conversation where we want to dig in a little bit more to the current children and youth experience in Nashville. We're going to start the conversation with a really fantastic person and good friend of mine, Dr. Maury from Vanderbilt University. He is going to be sharing his initial findings from a longitudinal study he is doing about Nashville's youth. And then we're going to go into a conversation with 3 amazing women who I feel very privileged to know and are all doing incredible work in our community. And I'll tell you about them later on in the conversation. Please feel free at any time to add questions into the chat or use the Q&A feature. We will be taking questions both for Maury's conversation as well as for the panelists later on in the discussion. So at the end of the day today, an hour from now, we are hoping that you will walk away understanding a little bit more about the inequities that some of our children and youth are facing in Nashville. You're going to hear and learn from experts who work with kids and youth and really understand different parts of our community in a way that will be, I think, incredibly informative. You'll be able to pose questions and talk about inequities, and then we'll leave you with a few things to think about in terms of next steps about how you can continue this conversation. So with that, I want to just start by telling you a little bit more about Dr. Maury. He is a professor of human and organizational development at Vanderbilt's Peabody College. His research investigates the school and community factors that affect youth's social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes, including school climate, disciplinary practices, residential segregation, neighborhood disadvantage, and other forms of structural inequality. Most recently, his work has investigated factors contributing to the racial and ethnic inequities in disciplinary referrals and the use of exclusionary discipline. So with that, I am thrilled to turn it over to my good friend, Maury, and I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Katie. And I am just beyond excited to have a chance to be a part of this conversation. I guess that maybe one of the ways to start this presentation is to take you back to 2014, when there's a group of folks at MNPS as well as youth serving organizations who had come together to discuss this issue of discipline disparities and the use of exclusionary discipline, and to start to try to get at the root of those issues. And one of the things that we began, actually, Katie, if you could advance it. One of the things that came out of that conversation at first was some really hard discussions about race and how we got to be where we are. But one of the things that was also fortuitous about that conversation was that as we were having it, the National Institute of Justice offered or released a funding request to study these types of outcomes. So it ended up being something that both I and MNPS and a host of community partners came together. And one of the things that we proposed as a part of this is to build a better way, a more complete data set of what's going on for young people. And one of the things that we that became abundantly clear from our initial conversations was that schools are often the target of our conversations about youth well-being because they have the most complete data set, but not necessarily because they are the only source of issues related to the well-being of young people. So what we set out to do was to try to build that out so that we could have a better understanding of what was happening for young people here in Nashville, but to also begin to think more strategically and more comprehensively about the types of interventions that might be helpful for reducing those inequities. You can advance it. So what has come out of this has been a real partnership in which we have tried to engage a variety of different data sources. Of course, the district has been an excellent partner, and in terms of allowing us to gain insight into student data. But we've also looked at a variety of other the types of data sources, everything from kind of how land is used within the city. So where are the parks and the grocery stores and businesses, financial institutions, as well as where are the sex-oriented businesses and alcohol and drug outlets, the types of things that we know are associated with young people's outcomes. We also partnered with a few youth serving organizations, the Oasis Center in particular, and the Nashville Civic Design Center, because we also wanted to get an understanding of Nashville through the eyes of youth. And to do that, we actually developed a process of allowing youth to map their experiences. So to talk about what neighborhood they were embedded in, but also where they like to spend their time and where they saw problems and things that they would like to improve over both within their neighborhood and across Nashville proper. So we use those data sets as well as things like 211, our understanding of the types of resources that were out there to support young people to map community assets. And again, we wanted to leverage all of this as we came to understand youth well-being in general, but also the issue of disciplinary disparities in particular. You can advance it. So I will start by saying, one of the issues that has come up in understanding inequities and discipline is that our attention immediately goes to the schools, and it's understandable that we would certainly look at some of the issues that are happening within the schools. And what we've seen from our analysis and from our engagement with the district is that there are a variety of things that may well have impact on the rate of inequity. I think one of the things that has been especially implicated in our conversations has been this issue of explicit and implicit bias. And what I have that one asterisk because I think one of the things we know that exists. I think what we see in the data is that explains relatively small amounts of the rate of inequity. Even if we just focus on the school district, we see that there are a variety of other issues. The disciplinary practices and policies. What types of things are young people being referred for discipline really varies by school. What kinds of sanctions that are being used actually vary significantly by schools. We also see that there is several issues around the amount and type of social and emotional supports. There's a great team of folks over at Brandsburg who are working on SEL and SEL supports. One of the things you'll see very quickly if you engage with them and folks at individual schools is that it's still a struggle because of the amount that there's relative to the size of our district, that the group that is providing those types of supports is still relatively small compared to pure districts. And what the last thing I'll mention here is that the biggest driver that we see in terms of explaining this rate of inequity as it relates to the school district is the differences between schools. And I think ultimately this gets to the fact that sadly, our schools are still segregated in many ways, especially once we get to the middle and high schools. And the overall rates of inequities are actually driven by some schools having relatively high rates of discipline referrals and suspensions, and those schools are serving primarily students of color. You can advance it. Now, where I want to spend most of the rest of my time talking about is the community contributors to disciplinary inequities. And one of the things that we feel like this is one of the important contributions, because we're starting to be able to look at this data and understand that there are several issues that are going on outside of the district that are showing up in the district. The first one is systemic marginalization. And if you can advance it. So when we talk about systemic marginalization, one of the things that is disturbing within the data is this idea that our Nashville district is starting to develop into what is referred to as an urban intensive district. And I'm using terminology from one of my colleagues, Rich Milner. And one of the things that means is that the district starts to look distinctly different from the population of the city in a variety of ways. One is that the district becomes a minority student population. And also has disproportionate numbers of students who are economically disadvantaged. We also see that the districts, urban intensive districts, have fewer resources for educators. So what you frequently see is that these are educators in urban intensive districts are paid less than surrounding districts, and often have fewer practical resources to work with as compared to some of the surrounding districts. The last thing I'll mention here is that you also begin to see this outflow of particularly middle-class families. And this is something that if you go back to, Katie mentioned the documentary. And one of the things that I think is important in that documentary is that it documents the demographic makeup of NNPS over the past century. And one of the things that you begin to see is that especially here in the last 20 years, 30 years, the district has really started to look different because of these outflows. And part of the outflow comes from, includes families moving to places like Williamson County and to Wilson County. Some of it is to private schools and within Davidson County. You can advance it. Another thing that is associated with this urban intensiveness is the fact that our student population is disproportionately located in elementary schools. And this is one of the things that when I first saw this, I was a little surprised, is that well over 40% of MMPS students are in our elementary schools. And those schools are also the most racially diverse schools by overall population. But when you look at the distribution of them, they are actually tend to be divided into schools that are more racially homogeneous than our middle and high schools. Thank you. Another thing that we see in the student population is that the residential segregation of our neighborhoods is replicated in our schools. So one of the things that if you look at who goes to which schools and the racial makeup of those schools, there's certain parts, certain clusters, and certain parts of the district that are very very racially segregated, in part because of that outflow is differentially happening across some of our residential neighborhoods. Thank you. And then one of the reasons why this is important, I mean, and I've said this before, is that I think people should have the right to have their children educated in the places that they would want. But part of what happens when we see this urban intensive process happening is that it starts to pull resources and investment out of the public district. And what goes along with that frequently are the harmful narratives about the district from people who are no longer actually participating in the district. So if you actually talk to people on the street, in many cases about Metro Nashville public schools, you will often hear negative things said about the schools, about the administrators, about the students, from people who no longer have any connection to the district to know actually what is happening within the schools. Okay. So a second source of inequities have to do with neighborhood resources. And one of the ways that we were able to access this was through some of the data from a neighborhood well-being survey with MMPS students. And what we found was that students really experience different types of neighborhoods, and that varied by race and by income. So Black students and low-income students reported living in neighborhoods that felt less cohesive and had less support. You can advance it.
Sorry, Maury, hold on, my computer did something. There we go.
There we go. All right, the second inequity has to do with the access to Nashville's amenities. I mean, one of the things that I think has come up is that Nashville has grown a lot and has lots of benefits. What we found from some of our mapping data is that depending on where you live, and you may have very different levels of access to those amenities. We found that the number one issue for young people in terms of being able to get to the things that they would like were the worries about reliable transportation and their parents' concerns about them accessing those amenities without proper supervision and transportation. And then the last thing that I'll say that it's very clearly showing up in the data is the inequities to access to caring adults. And one of the things that we see here is that inequity is exacerbated across age. So as students get older, they are less likely to report having positive relationships with adults outside of their home or school. And this again gets at that issue of neighborhood cohesion and the types of supports, the informal supports that are often helpful for students in maintaining their well-being as they say. And lastly, what we're starting to see in our data is this actually really painful picture of students who live in neighborhoods that they describe as less safe and less cohesive and with fewer assets. Those students are also feeling that they have less access for getting out of those neighborhoods to actually engage in other types of resources and amenities available in Nashville. So what you ultimately see is this picture of the proverbial rich in terms of access and resources getting richer, and those who are struggling facing even more barriers, not just within their schools, but within their neighborhoods and their lack of access to resources. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that we're also seeing real inequities in the types of neighborhood traumas that young people are exposed to. The number one that has come up and it's become a particular issue here recently is the exposure to violence, just because this year is going to turn out to be probably the most violent year in Nashville's modern or recent history. And if you advance it, one of the things that we'll see, and this may be hard to see, but it's a map of Nashville with the plots being the places where firearm or gun-related violence has occurred. And this was in 2018 and 2019. And one of the things, as you see that, as you look at the colors, the lighter colors, the kind of amber color, it has to do with income of those neighborhoods. So what you're seeing pretty clearly is that the places where firearm and gun violence events are occurring are also the places where the neighborhood income and resources are the lowest. Okay, you can advance it. A second type of trauma that we're seeing, and it's interesting because I don't think most people have thought about this as traumatizing, but gentrification. And when we've had an opportunity to have conversations with young people about their experience of their neighborhood. And if you advance it, okay. One of the things that we've heard several young people mention things similar to this young person who starts to talk about the fact that the neighborhood that they once were comfortable in and found support from is no longer feels like it's theirs. This young person says, they're mean, they don't talk to us, none of that. They kind of just look at us with a face and kind of discriminate against us. I don't like that about it because I was alone for most of my life when I was in named this neighborhood. I felt like I had a family, even though they weren't my family. I feel like they're kind of pushing that away. So even as we talk about the city advancing, we see that it's not advancing in some ways for many of our students. Advancing. The last thing that I'll mention is that we also saw in our data this issue of policing and surveillance as being experienced inequitably, and actually advance it. So here's another quote from one of the young people from North Nashville. And what he says, again, reflected, kind of captures the sentiment of several of the students. He says, a lot of police have been stopping people for no good reason out of the blue. It's been a lot more of that. So it's been concerning for a lot of people in our community because we're just like, everything has been fine for years now. And then all of a sudden, more people start to move in and things start to change. And we don't really like that. So what I will say just in closing is that we're just starting to scratch the surface of this data. In fact, we hope to be able to do a really detailed data presentation here in February, and we'll try to get that information out to you. But in the meantime, with the things that we're looking forward to being able to do is to talk more specifically about the experiences in each of the neighborhoods around Nashville, and to identify some of those specific levers that we think might reduce some of these inequities. And I just wanted to put out there, for us as a city, I think there are some things that is incumbent upon us to do. Number one is to invest in education. And we've seen some of that here recently, but we're still not where we need to be. And as we've seen in the conversation with the state's funding model and even with the city's budget discussions. And the other thing is our investment in youth. We've got so many different places where we can invest and reduce these inequities that happen outside of school that would subsequently be reflected in the experiences within the district. Just lastly, I'd like to thank everybody who has helped in this work. And this is a cast of thousands, literally, it feels like at this point. But the young people at Oasis and Civic Design Center, the district teachers and administrators, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that all of it really does seem like people are coming together to try to have a constructive conversation.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Nation. Just really helpful kind of context setting for all of us. I know we have one question in the Q&A. I'm actually going to start the panel and have get into a little dialogue first, and then we'll come back to some Q&A at the end. So keep questions coming, and you can put those again in the chat or the Q&A feature. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our wonderful panelists first, and then we'll take it off share screen so you can see their faces in a bigger way. First, we have Kasar Abdullah, a longtime social justice educator, advocate, mediator, and organizer. Kasar Abdullah has served as the Director of Advocacy and Education at Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. She was also a founding team member at Valor Collegiate Academies in 2013 and served as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer until 2021. A native of Kurdistan in Iraq and a graduate of Tennessee State University, Kasar currently serves as a DEI and education consultant. So we're thrilled to have Kasar here. She's also a MMPS graduate and a former Distinguished Alumni Award winner. So our second panelist, Vanessa Lazón, works for the Office of English Learners at Metro Nashville Public Schools as the EL Family and Community Specialist. In this role, she works directly with English learner families and schools to solidify the pivotal partnership needed for students to be successful. Previously, Vanessa served as co-chair for the Mayor's New Americans Advisory Council and led the Mayor's Office of New Americans for 4 years. Originally from Lima, Peru, Vanessa is a graduate of Lipscomb University. So welcome, Vanessa. And then last but not least, we have Johari Matthews, who serves as the Executive Director of the Northwest Family YMCA. Johari is leading the center's efforts to continue strengthening the Bordeaux North Nashville community through healthy living, youth development, and social responsibility. A graduate also of Tennessee State University, receiving her bachelor's in psychology. She has spent over 15 years in the nonprofit sector with a committed devotion for serving marginalized communities. So I think you can tell just from those bios that this is a really wonderful group of people to talk to us in a little bit more detail about what the experiences of our students are right now. So I am going to put us into, there we go. So let's kick off with a question for all of you. And just kind of reflecting on what you just heard from Dr. Nation's conversation. Each of you works with children and youth in different ways in Nashville. What really resonated with you about what you just heard, and how are inequities showing up in your work on a daily basis? And I'm going to let Johari kick it off for us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Katie. And, I want to start off with the entire thing, everything that Maury shared. I was like, yes, it was the amen corner over here. But two things stuck out the most to me. And one, in the work that I do on a daily, it's very clear to me to just see the inequities, the differences between our schools, and just from one side of the city or one sector of the city to the next, especially in the North Nashville and Bordeaux community, it's very evident and clear that nonprofits are filling the gaps where these inequities lie. The second thing that resonated the most, and the YMCA has a very true committed effort to really focusing on our middle schoolers and our high schoolers, because I think oftentimes we forget about them and they get lost in the shuffle. And so when he talked about the inequities for our students as they get older, and a statistic that I heard a while back stuck out to me, that it takes at least 5 caring adults to impact one student, which in turn will result in that student growing up to be a healthy adult themselves. And so it just made me really think about just how we serve our high schoolers, how we show up for our middle schoolers, and what we can do going forward to ensure that they in turn turn into healthy adults that we seek for them to be.
Great points, Johari. Kasar, what really resonated with you?
Katie, so much, but I know you won't give me all that time. I want to appreciate Dr. Nation for his courage and curiosity and willingness to really bring the invisible to visibility. I think when we're looking at the inequities facing our youth, it is not just within our school system, it is with our neighborhoods as well. And I think the two, I resonated with so much of what he said, just personally being an MMPS graduate and having children who are actually in public schools right now. As Johari was saying, I was like, amen to that. Yes, unfortunately, yes, in that situation. And also just currently right now, I mentor so many students who actually between 5th grade to 12th grade high school. And there's alarming amount of stories where students share that are connected to disciplinary policies, practices, and also explicit bias from adults in the building. So it's not even just peer-to-peer. And that's, it's very sad, right? And just to kind of give you some numbers, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding revealed that 42% of Muslim students from kindergarten to 12th grade reported bullying and harassment, more so from even adults than peer-to-peer. So that is the reality of our youth. So the question is, what have we done to change systematic policies that help our students feel safe? Schools are supposed to be safe, right? How can you really learn if you don't feel safe and connected? So that, unfortunately, is something that I resonated a lot with what Dr. Maury said. And it will take, resources. I think the other thing that he said that I really resonated with is one way for us to really test that we do put students or youth as a priority is to see how much time and resources we put in that group. Mm-hmm. What percentage of our city's budget is allocated towards schools and towards neighborhoods with programs that can help our youth feel connected to adults, as Johari was saying, at least 5 adults. And every single child needs someone that they could feel like that human being can be their shero or their hero when they are in the time of needs.
Great points, Kasar. And that point about the percentage of the budget that is allocated, that goes to children and youth, that's a wonderful ask for us of the City Council. So we're going to put that on our next steps list. Vanessa, tell us what resonated with you in that conversation.
Thank you, Katie. I'm glad to be here. Oh, sorry. Like my colleagues have said, everything resonated, right? The youth that we see on a regular basis at the Office of English Learners, they bring all kinds of needs, right? From very basic, because we have people who are brand new to not just the city, the state, the country, right? The continent, but just, the systems are new. They don't have a network of support. They left their families. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of times in how people get uprooted from their countries, regardless of the legal status that they have when they move to the US. But also, like Dr. Nation mentioned, all the things around secure housing, finances, et cetera, all of that plays a role. And unfortunately, young people, just like most humans, I would say, they need to be, feel like they're doing well, like they're okay in a stable place before they can learn, right, and activate like their learning, sort of, to put it in an easy way. But yeah, every day it's a different situation, and it's amazing the efforts that we put in from different departments coming together to our nonprofits. We're really blessed to have a huge network of nonprofits working to serve our English learners. However, yeah, it's in a growing city, in a growing district, with us as many languages as we have represented, as many places of birth where people come from. We definitely need a lot more resources available to help our young people, especially our young people. And the pandemic, don't even get me started, but all these social emotional issues are popping up everywhere, and it's hard to deal with every day. It really is.
Well, we were getting some great questions, and I'm going to come back to those in just a second. I'm going to let our panelists talk about one more thing each in just a second. And then I know that this question about public policy is something that I've been thinking about a lot. So we'll certainly come back to that in just a minute. Johari, the Northwest YMCA was built in 1969 and has a long history of serving African Americans in our city. In its 50 years in existence, what has changed in the services and supports that are needed for the families you serve?
Yeah, so, unfortunately, my transparent answer is not much. North Nashville, there has been recently a lot of conversation about North Nashville and Bordeaux and the inequities that North Nashville continues to face, so many years later, and even in this present day of 2021. And so there isn't much that has changed. North Nashville continues to be an underserved community. It continues to, experience, to Dr. Nation's point, a lack of access and a lack of resources. And not to mention, gentrification is on our heels. And so there are so many factors that come into play when you begin to talk about North Nashville and Bordeaux. I think the one thing that is a positive out of that is that the Northwest YMCA remains a constant for so many who live in this area. And even for those who have grown up in this area and they have left or come back, or Northwest YMCA is the one place that they remember the most. And in my experience and what I deal with every day, Northwest YMCA is a safe place for so many. Dr. Nation, when he talked about, when he shared some of the testimonials from the students who talked about how gentrification impacts their safety and how they feel that they no longer belong in their communities. I know for so many of our students who walk through our doors, the Northwest YMCA is that safe place for them. They're surrounded by individuals and staff and people who look like them, who understand them, who respect them, and they're able to just be themselves. And I see that on a spectrum from, our young people all the way up to our seniors, our adults, that the Northwest Y is that safe place for them. But it's also a resource for so many things, from, after school care, child care in general, to basic needs like food, health, and wellness, and even some of those things that are impacting our schools. So through our literacy programs, through just social, emotional development programs that we have, and it serves as a refuge for so many. So I think, the one thing that has remained the same is that the Northwest YMCA specifically is that constant for the things that are traumatic, but also the things as we haven't even scratched the surface on affordable housing and gentrification and what that looks like of pushing, long time residents out of their communities. But the Northwest Y, I feel like the Northwest Y is just serving as that place of refuge for so many.
So incredible, and what a resource to have in our community. Vanessa, you've had two unique roles serving immigrant families in Nashville, one from the mayor's office in the Office of New Americans and the other in the district's EL office. Tell us a little bit about the specific needs of new Americans and immigrants to our community and how you think Nashville is doing providing those supports.
Sure. Thank you, Katie. I mean, that's a loaded question. There are so many great things happening right in Nashville. I don't think we're at the beginning stages anymore. I moved here in 1997 and there was, little compared to now in regards to supporting our English learners. However, there's still a lot of needs, right? Like transportation being one of them, reliable transportation, right? Right now, we face many issues with families trying to simply get the children to school or, have transportation for getting to resources or physical exams that they need for registration into the school system, et cetera. And then it's so many things, right? I already mentioned secure housing, adequate translation, right? Our Metro Nashville Public Schools has a wonderful team of translators and interpreters who do a wonderful job, and they're working every day behind the scenes, and people don't even realize because they're constantly translating documents or helping teachers with phone calls, et cetera, just to make sure that our parents understand everything that's going out, all the vital stuff that's going out from schools. And then some, right? Like families have crisis and sometimes they have problems and issues and questions. And so all of that goes into that team. The requests for the team sometimes can be a lot. So again, just focusing on trying to increase the services already available. And like I mentioned earlier, we were very lucky to have, one, good leadership at MNPS. I think the EL office is doing amazing things, again, behind the scenes, intervening at every school and making sure that all the students have the services that they need to develop the language. But also from Dr. Rattle and her team, everything that they're attempting to do, it's pretty new, but they've done a lot of great work, and I think that shows. But then again, there are so many new students, and then it's not like it was before. The housing is all over the city, so people are getting placed when they come through, for example, the refugee resettlement program they get sent to different schools, and depending on the part of the town of Nashville, the school will be used to working with English learners or not, right? So then it's like everyone is at different stages. So it's just a matter of aligning the supports so that they get what they need and so that they can be in their seats and learning and getting the most out of the day. But I believe definitely we need more opportunities for cultural exchange and for people to really just do, mentorship or, just a conversation with newcomers. Just like the young person was talking about, people in my neighborhood now don't talk to me. I don't feel like they perceive me well. It's the same for newcomers, right? Like, I think it would be of great benefit to the city of Nashville for people to simply allow for those things to take place. I think we are richer because we have the ability to, learn from people from all over the country and learn languages or have them around. And so I think it's a missed opportunity to not have more places or events where people just come together and learn from each other. But again, I mean, as I echo everything that's been said, only very limited resources for the great work that's happening. And, we still have a lot of work to do. So it's just a matter of continuing to fight for more funding. And again, I think raising awareness, like what we're doing with this event, helps so that people know exactly from all of our diverse population, all of the things that we can maybe chime in and help improve things.
How lucky we are to have you at the district. So, Kasar, you've worked in a school that draws students from all over Nashville, a charter school in Valor Collegiate, and you and your children have attended several different schools across the city. What have you learned from your own experience about how we as a community have allowed the student experience to be so vastly different across the district?
I want to first say that we as a community have allowed classism, racism, and sexism to infiltrate the education system. And that trickles down to how students are experiencing their daily life at the school. I'll give you an example. Sometimes I wonder if our education system was dominated by men, would the teachers make an average of $46,000 to $56,000 salary? And so we have to be honest with ourselves. Like, is our public education system not adequately funded? Is it because it's dominated by females and not males? And I think that does affect our student experiences. And we've also allowed a lot of classism, as Dr. Maury was talking about, in our education system, right? How I went to 3 different high schools, and I'll tell you that one of the high school where middle income and higher communities were more enrolled in that school, I had access to technologies and books that the other school that I attended, which almost 99% were low income, we didn't even have, there were raindrops falling from the ceilings. Our buildings are outdated, right? And that affects, like, when you enter the school and the school's not clean, it's not comfortable. The seating, the equipment, the teacher equipment, all of that does affect our students, unfortunately. And I've seen that also with my own children, like even right now. I mean, quite honestly, my husband and I worked so hard to move out a particular neighborhood into another neighborhood so our students could experience a different educational experience than we did when we grew up.
So much to unpack from each of those answers. I'm going to ask all 4 of you and bring Maury back into the conversation now. Just a general question. We know that there's so many good things that are happening in our community, and not least of which being led by all of you on this call. And, we know that people are trying to serve our students better, but we also know that too many of our children and youth are just not getting what they need to thrive. So a couple things I'd like for you to hit on two parts to the question. One is, what do you think needs to happen to make Nashville a city that prioritizes children and youth? And if possible, hit on the question that was put into the chat around the types of public policy decisions that need to be made to better prioritize children and youth in Nashville. So Dr. Nation, why don't you begin, get your voice back in the conversation, and then we'll go back around to our wonderful panelists.
That was well timed because I was in the process of typing to that question in the chat. I think one of the things that has too frequently happened is that we really siloed the decision making around public policy, and what our research is showing, and our research isn't unique in this regard, is that a well-functioning city is good youth policy, is good school policy. Just typing that, one of the things that is clear from our data, not only this data, but previous studies, is that things like housing and security and mobility have direct impacts on students' achievement and their behavior. So if you want, affordable housing is a youth development intervention. Affordable housing is an education intervention. So one has to, I think, kind of break from this idea of kind of targeted and piecemeal intervention to really turn the question around to the question that you pose, which is how can we design our policy for this broader goal of thriving young people who are able to achieve and access the resources that we have here as a community. And as opposed to just saying, we've got to do something about discipline disparities, because that makes the problem way too small. Or even around juvenile justice, or all of these little pieces, it just makes the problem way too small.
Johari, what are your thoughts there? What needs to happen to make Nashville a city that prioritizes children and youth, and touching on the public policy question too?
Yeah, so for the sake of time, because I have so much that I want to contribute to this question, but I think my initial thoughts to this are, I mentioned earlier that nonprofits play such a vital role in filling in those gaps, and someone put in the chat that nonprofits shouldn't have to do that to make up for bad public policy, and I completely agree. And I think one way is that nonprofits need to be included in some of these public policy making discussions. Nonprofits see firsthand the impact on our communities, on the people that we serve. And a lot of times we're not invited into those conversations to lend that lens. Similar to our educators and to our teachers, nonprofits are being asked to, do more with less. And I think, our voice is our power. And I think if we genuinely want to move the needle, and if we want to move forward, we have to include nonprofits in that work, and in those discussions and in that policy making. In addition to that, I think just as a community, as an individual, I think it's important to understand that there's so much power in community mobilization. And I think oftentimes we take for granted just how much we can contribute to our communities, and especially to those nonprofits that serve our communities. And so, I just challenge everyone to think about just 3 ways that they can support a local nonprofit in their mission. And that can be through, the 3 T's, as I like to say: your talent, time, and treasure. So, if you have a talent that you can lend, we have so many kids, we talked about this a few of my colleagues mentioned this, just the importance of just the mentorship, the importance of having a positive adult in a young person's life. But also there's your time. You know, we have nonprofits who offer tutoring. We have nonprofits that offer translation, that need you know, resources that involve your time. And then lastly, of course, your treasure. You know, if you don't have the time, or if you feel like, hey, my talent isn't good enough, but I would challenge you on that. But you know, your treasure is important too, because like I said, we're being asked to do so much with less. And so those are just 3 ways that, you know, I ask everyone when you walk away from this panel and you think about just how we can move our communities forward, how we can support our children and our youth to encourage them to thrive, to just think about how you can get involved. And that's not limited to nonprofits. You know, if you're able to, I'm sure there's a school in your local community, you know, who would love to have your support in various ways. And I would just encourage, not only from the public policy sector, but also with our business community. So, you know, Nashville, we have so many of these large corporations and large businesses who are moving into the city. And you know, again, I'm challenging everyone, it sounds like, but, you know, my main thing, I always, you know, I always pull our businesses, I like to pull them to the table and pull their card to ask them, you know, what are you willing to do? How much are you willing to commit? And it's not just monetary, but, you know, how are you getting your employees involved? Especially if you're a business who is located, for example, we have a bunch of businesses in the North Nashville community that I'm constantly leaning on, because I'm like, you all directly impact the economic mobility, stability of our individuals who are living, and our families who are living in this community. So
that's so great. Vanessa, share a couple of thoughts with us, and then I'll have Kasar close us out.
I feel like most of the stuff that I was thinking about has been taken, but it's great to just echo that. But yeah, I think definitely secure housing is the most basic thing, right? For us, increasing funding for our translation team, you know, hiring more capable individuals who happen to be bilingual and bicultural always makes a difference, right? I think also reliable transportation, like I mentioned earlier, and definitely supporting the nonprofits. I was thinking, and Dr. Berthina put it in the chat, it takes a village. It does take a village, especially in a city where, you know, we have 83,000 students in MMPS. So it's a large population of students, and everyone comes with different needs. Of course, some families are more blessed than others. And so I think it's a joint effort too, right? If you're on the end of the spectrum where things are going well for the most part, then do the things that Johari was mentioning, for example. We need tutors, we need translators, we need, I mean, I could name even things outside of MMPS, like I'm sure the library needs bilingual tutors. So all of the newcomers who are, you know, out and about can spend some time with that, you know, just tutoring our students. We have a great tutoring program for the district. We do things at the EL office. Then there are places of worship and local nonprofits. You know, we have a lot, but we have a core group of nonprofits serving our English learners. So just supporting in any way you can. And of course, I second completely the comment about the corporations. We have a very limited pool of funders in the city. And so the fact that we have all these new corporations coming in, it's great, but we definitely would love to see them, you know, become part of our community, because I do think that in Nashville, we're pretty lucky to work together for the things that are important. So I think it's just a matter of stepping up our game and going from there. But I don't want to take more time because I know we're behind.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We've gotten so many good ideas. Kasar, close us out with some closing thoughts on all of this conversation. Then I'll share one slide about some potential next steps that people can join as well.
Sure. Thank you, Katie. I definitely agree with what we've been saying. I also wanted to name what's already been done. I think the Nashville Public Education Foundation is creating platforms to have courageous conversations conversations around the imperfections in our community and in our education system. I think that's a huge step. I think Dr. Maury and others who are actually pulling the data, because data is really important, looking at data to better understand the issues within the education system and how we can pull that together. I think we need visionary leaders who are passionate about education and who have the time and the talent to drive us towards where we have an education system that is updated, not outdated, because our current education system is not reflective on the demographics of our communities, especially in Davidson County. I think we need great school board members. We have some who are super passionate about education and are putting in everything that they have. So policy, again, I want to name that. I think at the school board level, at the Metro Council, at the state level, I mean, these all influence each other. I think the budget, we need to advocate for more money. I know some people are saying the parents need to do their part and pick it up. Hey, we're paying taxes. Let's use, I would rather have my taxes go towards schools than to buy weapons and drop bombs at another country. So we need to really check our priorities around budgeting. We have to do that part. I think we need community schools. I think our schools and communities need to be more connected, not only to the nonprofit world, but also to the business world. I think corporations have a moral obligation to give back to the schools that are raising global citizens. They're raising people who will go back into these businesses. And so I think they have to do their part as well. Again, I can go on and on, but this school system, we need a system that is centered around what is best for students.
Well, I think you all can all see why we wanted to bring these wonderful Nashvillians into the conversation today and share their insights and their recommendations and thoughts. I just cannot thank you enough, each of you, Maury, Vanessa, Johari, and Kasar. What an amazing group of people you all are. Thank you to everyone who joined us as well. I'll just leave with a couple of other things to add, multiple options that the panelists recommended that you could do to get involved. We also will be hosting a town hall with the Tennessean in January that will connect the dots between cities and schools that prioritize youth and children with how we fund that system. And so we're really trying to be intentional, while the governor is very focused on school funding, to pull in the voices of our community and influence those conversations. So please join us. That will be at the Martin Professional Development Center. You can find out more information on our website. With that, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone, and please help us make Nashville a city that is not so well known for its bachelorette parties, but well known for the fact that it prioritizes its children and youth. With that, we'll have a great evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us.